Welcome to Dimensions in Chumash by Rabbi Immanuel Bernstein, part of our collective Journeys in Torah. Welcome to Dimensions in Chumash by Rabbi Immanuel Bernstein. I'm Steve Geller, and I'm excited to bring you a piece by Rabbi Bernstein on Akeydas Yitzchok, the binding of Isaac. According to most commentators, it's the last of the 10 trials of Abraham, and in many ways, it's in a category all its own. Its enduring significance is reflected clearly in the exalted place that it occupies in our prayers to this day. This idea receives ultimate expression in the blessings of Zichronos in the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, which culminates with the single plea, Akeydas Yitzchok Lazaro Shel Yaakov Hayom Barachamim Tizkor. Remember the binding of Yitzchak on this day for his descendants with mercy. Although the events of the Akeyda are well known, a moment's reflection on the events involved will allow us to appreciate the magnitude of this trial. But at the outset, we will appreciate that much of the story can be lost on us, since we approach and discuss the Akeyda with the knowledge that it didn't actually happen at the end. To this end, putting ourselves back for a moment in real time, where Avraham had no notion that it would not occur, will also contribute most meaningfully to the appreciation of this test. First, what was the test? Well, Avraham and Sarah had been childless for decades. Finally, when Avraham was 100 and Sarah 90, they are given a son, the answer to all those years of longing and in whom their hopes for the future were invested. But now Avraham is being told to offer him up with no notion of being left with any other child to replace him, leaving any hope for an enduring legacy devastated. Moreover, the act itself of offering one's child as a sacrifice goes against the fundamentals of morality that Avraham had preached for all those years. To carry out this task now, himself, would be the complete undoing of his life's work. There was to be essentially no future to speak of after the Akeyda. And don't forget, the command to offer up his son is directly contradicted by an earlier promise that Hashem himself had made, stating that Yitzchak would continue his line and inherit his estate. Bearing all of these points in mind, we will begin to get a sense of the magnitude of this test of Avraham's absolute devotion to Hashem's word. And remember, this wasn't a matter of a single spur-of-the-moment decision to just do the thing and get it over with. We have a 3-day journey before Avraham reaches the site where the Akeyda was to take place. And there's much more to focus on than just the Akeyda itself. As we'll now see, we must understand, too, the impact and reverberations that will continue long after the test is completed. For example, we note that having passed the test, Avraham proceeds to name the place where it occurred. Verse 14 states, Avraham called the name of that place Hashem Yireh, Hashem will see. As it is said to this day, on Hashem's mountain he will be seen. None of the earlier tests resulted in the place where they were passed receiving a new name. So what's the significance of this coming after the Akeyda? In truth, even the words used to describe the renaming are themselves enigmatic, leaving us with several questions. First, what specifically is Avraham saying Hashem will see? 2, why does the sentence begin referring to Hashem seeing and then conclude with Hashem will be seen? 3, what day is being referred to by the words Hayom, this day? And fourth, how is all this connected to the Akeyda? And not surprisingly, the commentators from Rashi onwards discuss these basic questions. Let's consider a fascinating explanation which is offered by the Vilna Gaon. The basis of his comment is a midrash, which states that after creation, the divine presence resided below in this world. However, as a result of Adam's sin, it distanced itself from the world and ascended heavenward, residing in the lowest level of heaven. The major wrongdoings of 6 subsequent generations resulted in the divine presence ascending 6 levels higher until it was at the 7th and highest level of heaven, completely removed from this world. However, Avraham brought about a turning point, bringing the divine presence 1 level closer, and the next 6 generations bringing it closer still. Until in the days of Moshe, the divine presence had returned to reside in the world below. The entire process of returning the divine presence to this world was one which began with Avraham and culminated with Moshe. Both of these initial and final stages are described in verse 14 as follows. The pasuk begins by saying that Avraham called the place Hashem will see, reflecting his achievement in bringing the divine presence 1 level closer so that all may know that Hashem sees and supervises the events of this world. At this point, the verse has finished quoting Avraham's word at that moment, and the concluding words of the pasuk are those of the Torah itself, as it begins to describe how that process, initiated by Avraham, was concluded 6 generations later in Moshe's days. Therefore it says, which today may be said as Hashem can be seen on the mountain. So let's pause here and understand the profound meaning of what Rabbi Bernstein is telling us. Hayom, today, in the pasuk, is referring to when the Torah had been given on Har Sinai. On that day, the people experienced a vision of Hashem's glory in this world. So this one pasuk describes a process of bringing Hashem's presence closer to our world that started with the Akeyda, where Avraham says Hashem will see, and culminates with Moshe at Har Sinai, with the same pasuk telling us, Hayom, on that day, Hashem will be seen by all of Klal Yisrael. That's just amazing. And through this, we can see that the Akeyda went beyond being an event. Rather, it begins a process, which would end in the giving of the Torah itself. Still, we have to ask, what was it about the Akeyda which marked it as the beginning of this process? To answer this question, we have to look closer at Avraham's words in renaming the mountain Hashem will see. There are a number of statements from Chazal which reflect on the uniqueness of the Jewish people. For example, the Gemara in Kedushin 39b states that if a Jew wanted to perform a mitzvah but was unable to do so, it is nonetheless considered as if he performed the mitzvah. The reason is, since his inner will desires the performance of mitzvahs, any external impediment to its performance does not detract from his intention as a true expression of his will. In fact, this idea even has implications in the realm of halacha. The Gemara later on 50a says if a person is halachically required to perform a mitzvah that requires his consent, like offering a carbon or giving his wife a get, yet he does not consent, we coerce him until he says that he consents. The Rambam explains that since his inner will is to fulfill the mitzvos, it is actually his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, that is interfering. Once the coercion has been exerted, his Yetzer Hara has been subdued, and the consent he expresses indeed reflects his actual will. Both of these statements reflect the ideas that the innermost will of the Jew is aligned with that of Hashem. But where does the Jew get this nature from? The answer, says the Meshech Chochmah, is that it comes from the Akeyda. When Yitzchak allowed himself to be brought as an offering and was prepared to nullify his entire existence in response to Hashem's command, this fused within his nature the absolute alignment of his will with that of Hashem. And this became an inherent quality, part of his spiritual DNA, which we, his descendants, have inherited. So it's an even more wonderful thing that Hashem didn't allow the act to go through. The fascinating idea here is that this alignment was, by definition, already latent within Yitzchak, before he was called upon to act on it. However, by responding to Hashem's word and expressing this quality outwards, by manifesting this holy midah in the real world, it then became embedded as a fundamental part of his essential makeup to the extent that it now could be passed down to us. This idea has ramifications not only for when the Jewish people seek to do or are coerced to do that which is right, but also when they do that which is wrong. An incorrect act will be judged very differently if it represents the essential will of the perpetrator versus some outside influence. Jewish nature, as established through the Akeyda, is such that no wrongdoing ever expresses a Jew's true will, which is ultimately aligned with that of Hashem. This core nature, which lies beneath every other layer of consciousness and will, is something that can only be perceived by Hashem himself. This is why the Yerushalmi states that while Hashem initially judges in conjunction with the heavenly court, he concludes the judgment alone, basing it on the innermost nature of Israel that he alone can see. This, says the Meshech Chochmah, is the meaning of the name that Avraham gave to the mountain upon completing the Akeyda. Hashem will see. With this, Avraham was praying that he will always see the essential nature of the Jewish people, which was set during the Akeyda itself, and judge them accordingly. So again, it's with this in mind that on Rosh Hashanah we conclude that bracha of Zichronos by asking Hashem to remember the Akeyda for us with compassion. We're not simply asking him to recall the great merit of that event. Why would we exclude the other merits of our forefathers that might help us? No. We're asking him to recall the Akeyda for what it says about our essential nature and judge our deeds, both positive and negative, in that light. That organically, we want to be perfectly aligned with Hashem's instructions to us, even if we sometimes come up short. So now, putting together these two ideas, that Hashem's presence came closer to us in this world, and that a Jew's inner calibration to do Hashem's will was set in this moment, we will appreciate that these are essentially two expressions of the same concept. The extent to which the divine presence is close to the world is a product of the extent to which people are connected with the divine will. The initial distancing of the divine presence came about through Adam choosing a path which diverged from the will which Hashem had prescribed to him. So now, putting together these two ideas, that Hashem's presence came closer to us in this world, and that a Jew's inner calibration to do Hashem's will was set in this moment, we will appreciate that these are essentially two expressions of the same concept. The extent to which the divine presence is close to the world is a product of the extent to which people are connected with the divine will. The initial distancing of the divine presence came about through Adam choosing a path which diverged from the will which Hashem had prescribed to him. This distancing process continued until it was reversed by Avraham and Yitzchok through their total embrace of Hashem's will. Therefore, what brings the divine presence closer? On the personal, the level of Avraham and Yitzchok, the national, instilling that nature within their descendants, and the global, bringing the divine presence closer to the world, all have reverberations from this one idea. And now, the completion of this process 6 generations later likewise took place not only within the world, but also within the Jewish people. The link between these two events is expressed by the sages who state that the shofar which sounded at the giving of the Torah was one of the horns of the ram which Avraham offered in Yitzchak's place. In fact, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos informs us that this ram was part of a special list of items that were created at twilight on the 6th day of creation. The Alshich explains the significance of this timing, for clearly Hashem had the capacity to create these things earlier in the day. They came into the world after Adam sinned. This means that these items were created as a response to that sin in order to facilitate its rectification. Now the ram was offered up on the occasion which marked the beginning of mankind's recovery and reconnection with the divine will, and this reconnection found national expression when we stood at Har Sinai and proclaimed, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. By first stating that we will do, even before hearing, like Yitzchak, we were indicating a total acceptance of the Torah, whatever it might say. This complete alignment of our goals with those of Hashem was, in national terms, an Akeyda event, and therefore it was only fitting for the shofar which sounded at the culmination of Jewish destiny to come from the ram which Avraham had offered at the time of the Akeyda itself. And indeed, the Midrash further states that the second shofar from that ram will be the one that sounds to announce the arrival of Mashiach. That moment will represent the final and full connection between the world and Hashem and will reflect the full realization of the idea which began with the Akeyda all those centuries ago. Rabbi Bernstein gave us this incredible insight to deepen our connection with the Akeyda and how it directly touches all of us. Now when we read it, we are not only recalling a great episode in our early history, but we are reminding ourselves of the capacity that it instilled within us, from where the ability to realize our highest aspirations came from. The full legacy and message of the Akeyda is, look forward to the final redemption of Israel and the world by looking inward for the wherewithal to bring it about.